It's time for another board recap podcast. How are you today, Dr. Smith?
Doing well, thank you.
So let's take a look at last night's school board meeting. As always, we started with good news. And, we've said this recently. It seems like I think one of the board members last night said it's more great news than good news. It seems like it just keeps coming. But last night recognized the fact that we had several EVSC affiliated groups and individuals take on and win Celebration of Leadership Awards from Leadership Everyone. That is a great community celebration that took place recently. And to see our folks honored in that was just tremendous and showed what a great asset they are to our greater community. So definitely proud of them. And then last week we had our annual Educator of the Year surprise presentations, and EVSC had all four of the winners, which we take great pride in. We had our Principal of the Year, which was Aaron Huff from Bosse. We had our High School Teacher of the Year, Brian Bobbitt from North High School. We had our Middle School Teacher of the Year, Lori Castle Reed from Washington, and our Elementary Teacher of the Year, Kenneth Keenan Barnett. Great to see those individuals surprised and honored.
And certainly do appreciate the support of the University of Evansville, the Evansville Teachers Federal Credit Union, as well as the Evansville Courier and Press in recognizing outstanding educators and their contribution to the community.
Yes, most definitely. It was great to be a part of those celebrations.
Yes, it
So
was.
that takes us through the great news, in the words of President Kiefer. So that'll take us to consent items. And if you would take us through those.
Sure. Well, let's just jump in on item 2.02. And I'm assuming this far into these podcasts that individuals know how to access board docs. They can get it either through the board doc site or through our EVSC website. So we'll just dive
Sure.
right in then.
EVSCschools.com. That'll take you anywhere you need to go, really, for everything.
Great, thanks. Item 2.02, consideration allowance of payments. Now, it's really been about a month since our last board
It
meeting,
has.
so that's why this 19 million, actually close to $19.7 million allowance of payment is high. But when you think about it, every 2 weeks at a minimum, it's about 10 million. So then you put a month together, and I think that explains the 19.7 million. It involved two pays. It involved our health insurance, as well as our contract bus driver payments. Then I think about 2.7 million worth of invoices over a month. Next, 2.03, consideration to approve the purchase of items from extracurricular accounts. There was one for Oak Hill Elementary. They were going to install, for lack of a better phrase, a climbing wall. We have this asset in many of our schools. It is wildly popular.
Absolutely. Yes.
So I appreciate that. I appreciate the PTA support, funding support for this, as they put their funds together with the schools to invest nearly $20,000 in this climbing wall.
And we understand being physically active has tremendous benefits, and this is a great addition to our gyms and schools that have these for their physical activity.
Completely agree. That's what I've heard. I've never taken advantage of the climbing wall,
You'll
but
have to try it
I hear
sometime when you're at Oak Hill
very,
next
very
year.
popular. Okay. Well, we'll see. Then looking at the grant proposals, this was submitted by David St. Clair, who oversees all of our career and technical education. The school was the Career and Tech Center, and the grant name is Education Readiness Grant, and it provides up to $100,000 if we are a successful applicant. And what we would like to utilize these funds for, in part, would be to purchase new robotic arms, among other things. So excited about the possibility with that. Moving on to item 2.05, pleased that the board did approve Sheila Huff to serve as one of EVSC's recommended participants on the Evansville Vandenberg Public Library Board. Item 2.06, consideration to approve the agreement with MotorWord. This is, I think, something that might be somewhat of a surprise to our public. We have about 900 students that speak a language other than English as their first language. And we have, I think, that is around 42 or 45 different foreign languages.
I believe you're correct. Yes.
So when we think about translating our documents and existing items into their language that they are, I think, more familiar with than English as they transition to having English as their language of choice, we need those services. So this is basically an opportunity for us to provide those translation services. We think it will be about $5,000 for the entire year to translate all of our documents into the languages that are spoken either primarily at home or that were their first language.
And it really is fascinating, and I think you're right. People may not understand that when we're dealing with so many students coming in where from the home they're not speaking English as a primary language. Oftentimes, those students are developing rapidly. It really is amazing to
Yes.
see their growth. That doesn't mean that family members at home are going to be making progress like that because obviously they're not in school, and we have to be very supportive as we communicate with those family members as well.
Completely agree. Item 2.07, moving on to the consideration through the renewal agreement with 4D LLC. This basically provides services for mowing and landscaping and debris removal at the property located at 10,350 Petersburg Road, about 135 acres there, that will be developed as a future school site. Item 2.08, consideration to approve the agreement with EL Education for EL Summer of 2022 professional development services. So we have EL, that curriculum, in many of our elementary and K-8 buildings. This will support approximately 200 teachers coming together this summer to learn more about that curriculum and resource and how to utilize it to its fullest advantage.
And really exciting because obviously we know we've got to support those teachers if they're going to be carrying this out in their classroom. So looking forward to that opportunity for them.
Absolutely. Item 2.09, consideration to approve the Build, Learn, Grow Stabilization Grant stipends for extended daycare staff. So we are pleased to be the recipient of 2 rounds of grant funding. And so the board last night approved basically retention
Mm.
bonuses, if you will, for our employees that work in our extended day program. So we are very excited about
And
that.
they are important team members to the EVSC. We have a lot of elementary students utilizing that service, and these are individuals that are spending quality time with those students.
You bet. And then that ties nicely into item 2.10, consideration to approve the 2022-2023 salary increases as well as the letters of understanding with both ETA and our Teamsters Local 215. For the first time in history, we were able to go back to our employee groups and say, we can do better than the anticipated salary increases that we had negotiated with you. So, in essence, what we're doing is we are doubling the anticipated increase that employees were expected to receive next year. So, how can we do that, you may ask? This is driven primarily through ESSER funds right now, but we also have what would be a nearly $4.1 million ongoing expense because we are embedding this in our employees' base salary. So if you are a teacher and instead of receiving a $1,500 increase next year uh, through the provisions that are outlined in state law, instead of receiving that $1,500 increase, you would receive another $1,500 increase on top of that for a total of 3,000. So for a teacher at the beginning of their career, that's about a 7.5% increase. For a teacher that's at the top, that's about 4.2% increase. But that $1,500, if you're a first year teacher and you make a career out of teaching and stay with EVSC, that $1,500 increase over 30 years becomes $45,000 because it forever stays on your base. That's important for a variety of reasons. First of all, that's very important for one's retirement because that would increase your retirement as well as increasing the compensation throughout your career with EVSC. But the other factor that's very important for us as an enterprise is we have to make certain that we have the funds to maintain that once our ESSER funding is gone. So while the initial increase will be paid for through ESSER fundings, we had to make certain as we had requested permission from the Indiana Department of Education for our ongoing expenses. We, like every other school corporation in our nation, wanted or had to make certain what that would really look like. So we are, I think, very pleased that we now know how and what will be approved for ESSER funds. So that has freed up some EVSC funds that we think will allow us with certainty to continue to pay for this increase once our ESSER funds are gone. We just really needed to make certain that we had the capacity to do this post ESSER.
Well, and anytime you make any type of decision that's going to have an impact on a budget, like you said, it's not just about paying for it right now. you have to look at each year that
Right.
continues. And I did want to clarify, when you say ESSER funds, could you just say again what we're referring to with those?
Yes, those are funds that have been provided to every school, corporation, charter, and private schools in Indiana, actually through the nation, because of COVID and
Okay.
COVID relief. So part of that is our ability to put in retention funds to retain our highly talented staff. So we are doing it under that permissible expense.
Okay. So yeah, definitely pleased that we were able to do this. And again, not just for teachers, for all of our team members, all of our
Right.
employees, because it takes everyone for us to be successful.
It certainly does. Item 2.11, consideration to approve the renewal agreement with the EVSC Foundation. I think actually at the beginning of this calendar year, it was made public that the EVSC Foundation was coming together with the Public Education Foundation. So, as a result of that coming together, we have brought on board some staff that was with the Public Education Foundation. So, we have adjusted the agreement with the EVSC Foundation to reflect that change. Item 2.12, consideration to approve the regular board meeting dates for 2022, 2023. Item 213, consideration to approve the lease agreement with Dell Financial Services for new tech laptops. Primarily, this is for the imaging as well as the tracking that is necessary for those devices. And then finally, consideration to approve the agreement for the Old National Events Plaza. Now, this is, I think, somewhat unique in that we are grateful for the generous donations that community members have provided for the Festival of Nations to, for the first time, be held at the Old National Events Plaza site. Frankly, it has been held for the last 7 years, or for 7 years at Bossy High School. It outgrew the cafeteria. Now it has outgrown the
Just keeps
gym.
growing.
Yes, and it truly is a community celebration. We mentioned earlier with an earlier consent item for the motor word 2.06 that we have 900 students, 40 some odd languages that are spoken beyond English in our school corporation. This is a celebration of the diverse culture and heritage that we have within our community, and we want to celebrate that because I think that just adds to the richness of the fiber of our community.
And what a great problem to have when you continue to outgrow your locations because of the popularity and
Yes.
success of a program like this.
So specifically, this had been approved before the pandemic hit. The pandemic hit, so then they were not allowed. Certainly, when things shut down in 2020, in the spring of 2020, to do this, conditions were not that much different in 2021. We're grateful that they are in 2022. So these are not EVSC funds; they're funds that were currently received by EVSC. So we are just basically renewing the agreement so that this Thursday in the Old National Events Plaza from 5 to 8, we will have the celebration called the Festival of Nations. It's open to the public. I would encourage anyone and everyone to come out and celebrate with our students and families.
Yeah, definitely. Hope to see everyone there. So that wraps up consent items. That takes us to personnel recommendations.
So, personnel, as I always say at this time, the personnel items and action is there for your perusal. It is the time of year where we appoint administrators for next year also. So, you will see many administrators that are appointed there. And I think about 35 ish new teachers for next year were also appointed last night because it is that season.
It is most definitely. And then that takes us to two action items from last night.
Yes, 4.01, 4.02 were presented previously by Daryl Angermeyer, who's our Chief Facilities Officer. 4.01 was the consideration to award the contract for the Wrights High School auditorium lighting upgrade. So this will be both for the stage as well as the auditorium lighting within the auditorium. And that was approved last night. And then the second approval was for the K-8 textbook rental rates for the upcoming school year. And then as we move into information item 5.01, 5.02, very similar in nature to the action item of 4.02. So we will have consideration of the 22-23 high school textbook rental rates. And the primary difference there is we have adopted a new curriculum for ninth grade English, which we are very excited about, as well as for health.
Okay.
So those are really the only differences for high school. And then 5.02, curricular resources. When we look at that, once again, um, it really does talk about the differences that we are adding in. Like I said, ninth grade ELA, health, and then there are some AP additions to our curriculum.
And thanks to everyone who's always behind the scenes, really doing a lot of research and input to make sure that we provide what students need to be
Yes,
successful in their
there
learning.
are many, many things that go into a high quality education, certainly high quality content, and then the number one driver, outstanding teacher in every classroom. Those are very, very necessary. They're not sufficient in and of themselves, but we know those are two key drivers. So we do spend a lot of time making certain that we can have the best of both. 5.03 consideration to award the contract for Wrights High School exterior improvements. Basically, this winter was not very kind for the Bedford limestone steps that lead up from the link into the bowl. So those will all be replaced with concrete, and then we will do some of the landscaping, making certain that the watershed flows in the right way around the entrance there, and then start working on the exterior, starting with the link to paint that and make certain that that is in better shape. Then 5.04 consideration of the CTE program of studies. Two things that are under consideration here. Basically, getting a deeper bench, if you will, for paralegal studies. I know that there is a shortage of paralegals in our community. And then also a great partnership with Deaconess looking at healthcare professions. So it says central service technician. Well, what that is, I think sterilization, all of those things that go along with other professions in healthcare that one would probably not imagine. But I think both Deaconess and Ascension St. Vincent were blessed now as well to have outstanding healthcare facilities, but they really are cities within a city. So they have a lot of opportunities for employment
A
at
lot of
both
times we
their
make
locations.
connections, did this just recently, between really us as a large education system and our healthcare system. Everybody thinks about teachers, but we know there's a lot more behind the scenes. Same thing for them. Everyone knows about doctors and nurses, but there's a lot that goes into a large medical system
Right.
like our local
Food
one.
service, environmental, transport, maintenance, facility, all of those
It
things.
is kind of a city within itself. You're
It
right.
certainly is. Item 5.05, consideration to approve the agreement with Talkspace. So Talkspace really, I think, is fairly new to the educational scene, although it's been out for a while. There's been much talk based upon the research in terms of what the pandemic has done that have I think the pandemic has laid bare um, stressors that were already there, but and has also magnified them. So Talkspace will allow our employees and their spouses and their family members to have access to high quality mental health care, somewhat akin to telemedicine. Um, but it has been very successful in other places. I think we may be the second district in Indiana to also provide this for our employees. But we are going to do this for a year, see what the utilization is, and if our employees find value in it, we will continue it. And if not, then we will have been able to make an informed decision.
Sure.
But
Definitely has a lot of potential if it is utilized the way we think it might be to provide some
it certainly
necessary
does.
supports for our
And this is
employees.
on top of our employee assistance program and
Correct.
other benefits that we have for our employees. But I know I continue to hear stories of access to mental health in our community being very, very limited and people having to wait 3, 6 months for an initial appointment. And when you need assistance, you need assistance.
Definitely.
So excited to provide this for our employees. Item 5.06, consideration to approve a food service policy regarding comped meals, really for law enforcement. This is a program that we've had, I think, for about 4 years. So this really does two things. It allows the State Board of Accounts to know what our policy is in terms of paying for the meals that we provide law enforcement officers. And then we also are going to evaluate this practice to see if it is actually having the intended result. We do appreciate any time our law enforcement officers can come into our facilities, have conversations with kids, and be present. Um, and in exchange for that, they can come in and have a free lunch on us. We just want to make certain that that is actually being taken advantage of by our law enforcement and has the outcomes that we desire. And if it does, we'll continue it. If it's not really being utilized, then we'll discontinue that practice. 5.07 Education Operating Fund Monthly Review, 5.08, 5.09, and 5.10. All of those are monthly financial records and updates that our Dr. Underwood provides for our board members for their review.
Okay. Lengthy list of information items that was shared with our trustees last night and had a bit of discussion, answered some questions where those came up. And so then that takes us to continued business. I know one of the topics you talked about, we've already addressed with the Festival of Nations happening Thursday night, but you had a couple of other things you shared with the board as well.
Yes, I share with the board that we lost a true champion of education, a trailblazer in the world of education. Maddie Miller passed away last week, and she had begun her career with us in 1958 and then ended with 13-year stint as an outstanding principal at Harper in 2001. And in the interim, she was a teacher at Harper for 13 years, but just did so many things for individual students. I know Pat Shoulders, every time I mention Maddie Miller to him, comments on what a remarkable impact he had on his life. And I know that Pat's not the only one.
Such a community leader, really.
Yes,
She and her husband both. They're both deceased now, but longtime educators.
yes. So they don't make many Maddie Millers.
Right.
And we were so blessed to have her for as long as we did and for her entire career to be of service to our students and our families and our entire community.
Yeah,
So,
definitely grateful for the impact she made.
yes. And then the only other thing that I had for continuing business was an important announcement and an important update on the work that really has taken more than a year and a half, or that started a year and a half ago, talking about schedules and how it impacts both our families and our staff. So, about a year and a half ago, we did a very deep dive into high school schedules. We surveyed our students, we surveyed our staff. What are those characteristics of high school schedules that you feel are most important for us to embed in our future high school schedule? So, as a result of all that work, the decision was made to adjust the schedule as we have already announced for next year. And we feel very good about that. Then the next part of that work then shifted to basically start and end times for our students as well as our staff hours. So there were two primary drivers of this work. First of all, was the need to take into consideration of how the nationwide bus driver shortage was impacting our schools. Um, so, as part of that study and review, we have always had a pretty quick turnaround time. And if the public doesn't know this, let me back up a little bit. Our bus drivers will pick up K 8 students, middle school students, and high school students, and then deliver them to schools. And then they will turn around and pick up our elementary students and then deliver them to the elementary schools. And in the afternoon, that process is, I say reversed, because they start out the schools, K-8s, middle and highs, deliver them, and then come back and then do the same for elementary students. As I said, it was always a tight window, but because we have fewer bus drivers, a little more than 50 fewer bus drivers than we had before the pandemic started. And I think it's well documented that we've increased salary and compensation, advertised a great deal. It's just,
Done a lot of work with routing
yes,
for efficiencies.
those are very specific skill sets, and the training that it takes from the time you begin until you can actually drive for us is fairly long. So we've done lots of things in terms of routing and all of that. Still, that was not adequate, and we still had to provide some relief. So as a result of that, we are delaying the start of the elementary instructional day by 15 minutes. So instead of the instructional day starting for our students at 8:15, that will now start at 8:30. And additionally, then instead of students being released at 3:10, they're going to be released at 3:25. So we're shifting the instructional day, not changing the minutes or anything like that, but just shifting it forward for 15 minutes. The other driver was the need for all of our teachers to have daily plan time as well as PLC time. So, in order to accomplish this, we're going to have our teachers have an 8-hour day next year that includes their lunch, and an 8-hour day that also includes their plan time, and an 8-hour day that also includes their PLC time. So, uh, and individual schools can adjust these times as they need for the unique needs that our schools have. But in theory, if a teacher then would report by 7:15, then their release time would be 3:15, but that 8-hour day would include their lunch, include their plan, and include their PLC.
And feedback has told us that teachers know they need more plan time. And when you say PLC time, of course, you're talking about professional learning communities, which, if you
Right.
want to think about that, is team plan time, second grade teachers working together, English teachers at the high school level, what have you, working
It's
together.
it's really time for professional teachers to come together in those collegial and those professional settings to process what is best for students. And when done well, that time then helps alleviate some of the personal time that individual teachers would have to spend planning individual lessons. If they can plan together in a group, plan assessments in a groups, kind of divide and conquer some of those things that each teacher needs to do as an essential part of their work. If they can do that together, then in theory, it should save teachers time.
And I think anyone can imagine, for teachers to be successful, they have to have plenty of time to prepare, not just for themselves, but with team members, because
Right.
you don't just walk into a room full of children, as we both know,
Yep.
and start teaching. There's a lot of behind the scenes work
Right.
involved with that. So glad we could make some accommodations, and hopefully that will help that.
Well, we will continue to monitor it to make certain that it does have the desired impact for students that we hope. And we also know, I know of no teacher, I know of no outstanding teacher that can come in at the beginning or at the last minute of their assigned, quote unquote, assigned time, and leave the minute
Sure.
that they can and get the work done. Teachers do an incredible job. I would love to be able to give them more time. Hopefully, this is time that we are providing that will then give them some time back.
Yeah, hopefully a step in the right direction. And I did want to clarify too, if you're listening to this last night, then we communicated with our elementary families because of the adjustment to the elementary student day. We did not communicate with middle and high school and K-8 families because their student instructional day is not changing as far as the beginning and the end time. So didn't want anyone with a high school or a middle school student to think their time is changing. It is not. That pertains to the
Correct.
elementary students.
Yes. Thank you very much for mentioning that. And elementary families should have also received a communication from their elementary school that would either provide more specifics in terms of what that drop off looks like in the morning, or at least a time when that school will be providing that additional information.
Most definitely. So I know they've received that information, or will get even additional details on that.
Correct.
Definitely don't want anyone being concerned at this point about what that would look
Right.
like. So, because we know mornings are hectic for working families with children. So we
Yes,
want to
they
do
are.
everything we can to help with that. So, and then I think finally, we don't want to miss the fact that if you're listening to this on this release date today, on April the 12th, a week from today, you're going to be having your annual opportunity to share with community leaders at the weekly Rotary Luncheon your state of the schools. A little different this year. You want to tell us about that?
Yes, it will be a little bit different this year. I've been blessed now to provide this will be the 11th state of our schools, but it's going to be a little bit different in terms of format. This is going to be the first of a three-part series. I always lament, I would love to have more time to go into depth about some of the topics that I think are really important for the public to engage with. So on Tuesday, April the 18th, we will have the first of three, and it will really kind of set the stage for this is education, the current state of education, and where we envision it can and should go.
And we do so many things that I know you're incredibly proud of here in the EVSC, and you always enjoy having this opportunity to share with the leaders in this community so that they know what's happening in the public school system of Evansville, Indiana.
You bet. I'm so proud of our outstanding staff, and I love to share their accomplishments with the community any opportunity that I have.
Okay, so as you said, that's going to be a week from today on the 19th at the Rotary Luncheon. We're going to do it again then, as you mentioned, part of the series in August, and then once again in November. So we'll be looking forward to those as well. And I think that wraps up last night's school board meeting. Thank you, Dr. Smith, for sharing all the details.
Thank you.